by Mr. Stern of Florida and Marge Kapner. And Marge called him a criminal, a crook. And after I put that out, I think it was 2 days later after it hit, they took that portion of the site down, on C-SPAN.
I wonder why.
And I wonder why, too.
I mean, Mr. Paulson, of course, it's the most amazing thing. Here's a man who gave up a job. He was getting $35 million a year to take a job for a paltry $185,000 as the Secretary of the Treasury. But nobody was told that because he was leaving Goldman Sachs and he had $200 million of stock in the company, and certainly he'd have to be a conflict of interest if he were to, be the Secretary of the Treasury and have $200 million in stock. So they let him take the stock out without paying any income tax. And
isn't that wonderful?
And of course, when somebody brought that up, he said, "Well, of course, I did that just so I could serve my country. That's the reason. I certainly, quit my $35 million a year job to take a job for $180,000 a year. I wanted to serve my country, and after all, that was the way the law was written. So I'd get the $200 million without paying any income tax." I wonder how many people in the audience would be willing, of course, to take a job working for the government if they could get a $200 million tax-free, or maybe that's just for the elite, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations in Bilderberger, Henry Paulson.
He's a Bilderberger, all right.
Well, Bob, certainly let's look at some of the things that are happening as far as the economy. What are the things that you'd like to bring out to our listeners?
I think one of the things is the continual cover-up by the major media of the stealing of money from investors, both professional as well as the public, money managers, hedge funds, by Goldman Sachs and 15 others who have their computers close to the New York Stock Exchange computer, which allows them to flash trade. And that's just a euphemism for front-running. They don't want to call it front-running. And front-running is when you have a 10 or 20 nanosecond advantage and you're able to see what the order is and you act accordingly in your own behalf. And, of course, the other guys after Goldman Sachs get second and third and fourth and fifth, whack at it. And this is stealing. And the media doesn't want to touch it.
Well, that's why Goldman Sachs, and I think it was 56 out of 58 trading days in the last couple of months, Goldman Sachs made over $50 million a day on 56 to 58 days, and some days they were making $100 million a day. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Front running as well as inside information.
But Goldman Sachs, of course, has powerful friends at the highest levels of our government. Certainly, Timothy Geithner's chief of staff just happened to be a lobbyist. I think his name was, Mark Patterson, something like that. He was a lobbyist for Goldman Sachs, and certainly Henry Paulson came from Goldman Sachs, and he was in constant touch with Goldman Sachs. So he was discussing every major move he was making when he was Secretary of the Treasury, and when asked about that, he said, "Well, I had a waiver from the White House that said it was all right to have private consultations with a leader of one of the largest banks." Of course, nobody ever mentions the leader of that large bank just happens to be a member of the Trilateral Commission, as does the assistant leader and CEO of Goldman Sachs. Isn't that a coincidence?
That letter only covered 4 calls, and after its date, and before that there were hundreds. Not only there, but to the other firms as well.
And then, of course, Mr. Paulson put in a man named Liddy in as head of AIG, and Liddy, who had strong ties to Goldman Sachs. And what does he do? He transfers $12.5 billion, the American taxpayers' dollars, to Goldman Sachs, another $12.5 billion to J.P. Morgan Chase, both of them tied into the Trilateral Commission. And of course, he says, well, I had to do it. I mean, we had these contracts with them. Why didn't he say, look, we're facing bankruptcy. This is not our money. This is money from the taxpayers of America. And Goldman Sachs came up and said they made some $3.5 billion in the second quarter. Well, if somebody gave me, $12.5 billion, I bet I could show a $3.5 billion contract too. Imagine what would happen if they hadn't got all those taxpayer dollars. And where is the outcry from Congress or from the Senate? We'll be back in just a moment with Bob Chapman right here at Radio Liberty. This is Dr. Stan. Our guest is Bob Chapman. Our telephone number, if you'd like to call us, is 1-888-24-LIBERTY. 1-888-24-LIBERTY or 464-8295. Now, if you are in a recession and you want to try to get the economy going, first of all, why you suddenly want to cut taxes so that people will have more money to spend, they can buy things, and when they buy things, you can get production going. But although President Obama said he's not going to increase taxes, he simply lied. The cap and trade bill was a massive tax. So it'll be an indirect tax. Your electricity bill will go up 2 or 3 times, and of course your cost of gasoline is going to go up because they're going to increase taxes on the federal taxes on the gasoline, I think up to 77 cents a gallon. So they said, well, we didn't increase your taxes. We just increased the price of electricity. We just increased the price of gasoline by taxing the gasoline, but we didn't tax the people. And then, of course, the health care bill is atrocious. If you certainly do not take out insurance, the health insurance, what are they going to charge you, 2.5%, or is it 8% if you refuse to take out their insurance? So they're not going to tax you, except they're going to punish you if you don't take out the health insurance. And, of course, a lot of employers are going to just have to start laying off people that won't be able to afford the health insurance. Pick up the story there, Bob.
That's part of it. In the forecaster, I had a whole list of things, page by page, that are just unbelievable that are in that bill, and which includes even having access to your bank account, through the system.
And of course, they also wanted the compulsory counseling on euthanasia, how to kill yourself. What sort of madness is that? Well, it's really very not madness at all. There isn't enough money. The only way that they can make the system work is to kill off the elderly. So they're going to have compulsory counseling on euthanasia. As you say, it's the Dr. Kevorkian's health bill.
That's right. And you have to do that every 5 years if the bill is passed and that's in it. So you probably start at 65, and by the time you're 85, if you live that long, and lots of people do, they just tell you, here's a box of pills, take 6 of them tonight and live happily ever after. And that's what's going to happen. If you're ill, they're going to let you die miserably. I mean, these people are absolute monsters. And, the President of the United States is the head of a corporatist fascist government, and he's a Marxist. And so the American people just don't know what's being done to them.
But of course,
that's why we do what we do on the radio and have for so long. And if that thing is ever passed, quite frankly, I don't think it will be, but the people at these town hall meetings have gone berserk. I mean, these are, Joe Sixpack and his wife and other people who normally vote. These are the kind of people who get out and go to the town hall meetings and say, hey, look, we don't want this Euthanasia Act. And I've seen the congressman stand up there and tell them, you don't know what you're talking about.
And I'll tell you what, Nancy Pelosi called these people Nazis. He called them Nazis for daring to speak out at the town hall meetings. Well, I think there are a lot of people out there who are very concerned, who look more upon Nancy Pelosi and her fellow cohorts as the Nazis, who are bringing National Socialism to the United States. And, of course, she wants, of course, to get these clunkers off the road because they're burning so much gasoline. She spends 66,000 gallons of fuel every time she flies either way, from New York to West Coast to West Coast. 66,000 gallons of gasoline. I think it costs something about $120,000 for every round trip. That she has her own 757, something like that. is paid for by the American taxpayers, but she's so concerned because we have cars that burn a lot of gasoline, but she's got her own plane provided by the government, $120,000 round trip every week, about $480,000, almost $500,000 a month for Nancy Pelosi. But she's concerned about us Nazis who are objecting to what she and her fellow cohorts are doing. We've got George calling from Toronto. George, you have a quick question for our guest?